joining us for a chat. So I just wanted to ask you about your relationship with art as a child, and what was your earliest memory of encountering art?
Yeah, well, obviously my dad is an artist, so for me, art was a very kind of normal thing in our day-to-day life, I guess. And we kind of I grew up as a kid in the 80s, I suppose, in the early 80s, and we didn't really have a television and stuff. So I think when you don't have TV, you do spend a lot of time kind of making things, building things, doing crafting, drawing, painting. So yeah, my siblings and I did a lot of that kind of stuff when we were small, yeah.
And kind of just left to your own devices, or were you directed?
I'm trying to remember now. Probably more or less left to our own devices to a large extent. I don't ever remember doing any kind of drawing with my dad as such. Maybe a little bit here and there, but not really. I think it was just something we kind of was just sort of self-initiated, really, and it was just something we did, really. Yeah.
And do you remember the first piece of art that you really loved?
I don't remember particularly, but yeah, I think it's just something we really enjoyed doing, you know. I think we did a lot of painting and stuff like that, you know. I suppose most kids do a lot of painting and drawing, but like I don't particularly remember any one particular piece or anything like that.
Just exploring and using your imagination.
Yeah.
And then when did you decide you wanted to be an artist?
I guess because my dad was an artist, that I suppose a lot of kids want to kind of do what their parents do. That's kind of like a normal thing. So probably from a very young age, but then so when I was a kid, I probably always thought, oh yeah, I'll be an artist too. And then when I was kind of a little bit older and when I was a teenager and stuff, I did kind of other things and was interested in other things, but I kind of came back to art then again when I was a bit older again.
And you also studied photography and...
Yeah, so that was kind of how I got into art as well. It was kind of a roundabout way of doing it. Just working in photography, which is like an art form in itself as well. Then I started doing some more drawing and painting, and so I mean, photography is still a really important part of the work I do as well.
Okay.
So yeah.
And then your kind of relationship with landscape, has that always been, or with landscapes, has that always been part of your practice?
I would say more or less yes, because I think when I was into photography, I did a lot of kind of landscape photography as well, both kind of urban and rural landscapes, traditional and more kind of modern style. And I think my painting, I kind of continued that sort of that's sort of looking at the landscape in my painting work as well. So I would say yeah, definitely, yeah.
And then what is it that you feel painting brings that maybe you can't express it through photography? Or
so I think photography is great if you want to do something very instantaneous, and you know, it's very fast. You can take a picture and then you can instantly see the result. I think with painting you have more of a kind of a connection, and it's more of a kind of an organic process, and you can kind of change direction in the middle of a painting as well. So I think the process is very different. Yeah.
And would you feel that paintings, you're like a little bit more expressive in the painting, or?
Yeah, I think so, because it's more, you have that kind of physical connection with the work as well, and there's maybe more room for experimentation on a certain level than there would be with photography. I think with photography you're often, it is very creative and you can kind of create a photograph, but you're often documenting something, whereas with painting, and sometimes with painting as well, you're documenting something, but sometimes it can just be kind of something that's completely from your imagination as well. And that's really where it differs from photography, is that sort of like the imagination to imagine an image and just develop it organically in a way, I suppose.
Yeah. So just coming to this specific exhibition, Speculative Artefacts, I'm really interested in the name, actually.
Yeah. So I guess it's kind of like an eye in the future, but also kind of an eye in the past, and sort of almost looking at this maybe slightly uncertain future, or imagining how a future could be when you're looking back on on the world we live in now and trying to imagine what these buildings would be like, you know, as a sort of almost like a kind of a relic of the past as well. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I was looking up the word speculative, and one of the definitions is guessing, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
So it's kind of like, yeah, I guess, you know, they're kind of big words really, aren't they? Speculative, artifact. So, but when you break it down, yeah, speculative is kind of like trying to guess or imagine what something is going to be, and an artifact is like, you know, something from the past.
Yeah, and
like
it's usually used in archaeology or something,
yeah,
you know, often.
Yeah, so it's like kind of, yeah, trying to imagine the future, where you're in the future, but you're kind of looking in the past, and you're looking at buildings that are from the past in a way.
Yeah,
so that was kind of the idea of
so would you say then that a lot of these buildings are in the future?
For me, well, obviously they're not in the future now.
But when you were kind of proposing
I tried to kind of look at them as if they're in the future and somebody's looking at them.
Okay,
I suppose
really
in a way.
Yeah. So then, with I'm quite interested in the color schemes this color scheme that you used.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of kind of purples and pinks, and then like electric blue and different tones of blues.
Well, I guess because some of the places I go, so when I do a painting, normally what I would do is I'd go and visit a place and take photographs of it, and then I'd look at those photographs and decide to change some of the colors. And like some of the places I photographed were kind of really unusual places as well anyway, so I just wanted to kind of maybe make them even more unusual in a way as well, and that's why I decided to use these kind of unusual colors to make this almost kind of like future landscape, or this, I don't want to say like alien landscape, but this almost this kind of this kind of unusual future kind of landscape as well, I suppose.
And there is a kind of almost an alien quality, and actually some of the children I was saying that have visited have kind of picked up on that quality to the landscape as well. There's a kind of almost a Mars-scape in some of them.
Yeah.
And then some of I've noticed, do some of the buildings seem to repeat themselves in the paintings?
Yeah, I mean, well, oftentimes what I would do as well is that I would take one photograph of one particular building and I'll do like a few different paintings of it, or a few different views of that, or a few different versions of that one place, if it's a kind of a photograph for a place that I'm really interested in.
And then, but the landscape around it has changed. So you're kind of placing it in like an imaginative space.
Sometimes I'll just have it in a really kind of empty space, so you're just really looking very carefully at just the building and not the landscape. And other times I have like the building and the landscape, and there's a lot of detail in both, so it's like the building is almost part of the landscape.
An interaction.
Yeah.
And just speaking of that kind of interaction with the man-made and the built structures and the nature, that seems to be something, there's something there as well. There's a kind of a dialogue going on there.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's also part of a kind of a landscape painting. It can be a kind of a man-made urban kind of landscape, like a town or a building or a farm or a factory, or it could be like a natural landscape, like a forest or the sea. And sometimes I like to kind of contrast those two things. So, like a kind of a natural landscape and kind of a more of a man-made landscape. And I like kind of, putting the two things together and seeing how they kind of compare and contrast.
Yeah. So just in terms of kind of the landscape painting genre, do you feel that you kind of sit within that, or do you sit alongside it, and where do you kind of position yourself within that if you do?
Yeah, I mean, I don't like to sort of pigeonhole myself too much, but I sometimes like look at my work as a sort of a contemporary landscape, contemporary landscape painting. So it's a different kind of landscape painting and a different way of looking at the landscape, I would say.
Okay. And is there any painters or artists or even photographers that have influenced the way you work now?
I mean, so one painter that I really like is George Shaw. He's a British painter. He was nominated for the Turner Prize a few years ago, and he did a lot of paintings on the housing estate in Coventry where he grew up. And I just thought they were really kind of unusual, it's almost like a kind of a landscape that could potentially be very boring or everyday or unremarkable, but he's kind of made them these really interesting places as well, and I thought that was interesting.
And his work also is very there's human traces there.
Yeah.
But there's no humans in the work,
Yeah.
or I haven't seen any humans in his work really.
Yeah, and and for me, it's sort of like that's one of the kind of sort of keystones of landscape painting is, you may focus on the man-made, but not the humanity within the sort of painting, and it is about these kind of sort of empty spaces as well, and they are, like, when I photograph these places that I paint, they are empty. There is nobody there, so I try and maybe kind of echo that feeling as well in my work.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay, but then you are interested in, or I've read that you're interested in the layered human history of the place.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's that kind of like contrasting between the man-made and and nature, and like to see this sort of like the legacy. I don't want to say the legacy of humanity because that sounds a little bit ominous, but like just to see, traces of man's, woman's, whatever humans kind of input into the landscape. I think
So
without
like
people being there, you know what I mean?
So it's like a contemporary kind of archaeological kind of digging down with your painting. Okay, Pascal, I just wanted to also ask you about your daily life as an artist, and if you can describe a typical day in your studio or as an artist.
Well, it always starts with coffee, yes. And I am one of these people that when I go into the studio, I like to do a full day. I find it very hard to go into the studio and do an hour or two. Now, everybody has a different working lifestyle, and some people have to just put in a few hours here and there when they can. But I mean, even for me to prepare work on a painting, mixing, because I use oil paint, so by the time I've mixed up the paint and gotten everything ready, and set up, you're nearly into an hour already, like. So yeah, I would start with coffee, mixing paint. It depends where I'm at in the work. So if I'm in the middle of a painting, it always starts with mixing paint and working on painting. If I'm at the beginnings of a painting, it could be measuring things out, looking at different photographs on the computer, trying to figure out which kind of painting I want to do. And then I often listen to podcasts or music when I work, a lot of true crime podcasts. When I'm drawing, I just tend to just really focus on the drawing because I have to be really concentrated on measuring things out and drawing everything. But when I start painting, it's kind of more enjoyable. I prefer painting than drawing. And I can put on a podcast and kind of enjoy the process a lot more.
And do you find that listening to something like that, it kind of takes you a little bit away? You're not you're a little bit removed from the work?
Yeah, and I think that helps as well sometimes, because it kind of, I suppose it could become a little bit tedious if you're spending 7 or 8 hours painting and just painting and not having, that sort of removal a little bit mentally from the work a little bit. I think that does help,
It's interesting with true crime, I can kind of
there's
a moodiness in the work.
and you can kind of zone out a bit as well,
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Well, listen, thank you so much for speaking to me today. It was really interesting conversation, and the show was fantastic.
Great.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for